Well, in this video we'll just discuss 4 types of speciation. Now I'm just going to go briefly here, then I'll go in a little bit of detail. Since I have my notes with me, I'll just read from this. Well, first, of course, you got allopatric speciation, which is, of course, speciation in which populations are physically isolated by an extrinsic barrier. Parapatric speciation is a special version of allopatric speciation and happens when one of the isolated populations have few individuals. I apologize for my horrible handwriting. Parapatric speciation, there is no extrinsic barrier to gene flow. Sympatric speciation does not require large-scale geographic distance to reduce gene flow between parts of population. Now, of course, I'll go ahead and read from my notes. Of course, allopatric speciation, we already, speciation in which biological populations are physically isolated by an extrinsic barrier, which is, mountains, rivers, things like that. New river flows, mountain peaks, things like continental drift, things like that. Or they, go to a new island or whatever, and evolve intrinsic reproductive isolation, which is of course genetic, such that if the barrier breaks down, individuals of the population can no longer interbreed. Allopatric speciation, right here, is thought to be the most common way that species evolve or forms. Allopatric speciation. And Peripatric speciation, right here, is a special version of allopatric speciation, and happens when one of the isolated populations has very few individuals. Here's a very hypothetical example, and they're going in this paper, because as you'll see here, when I took evolutionary biology and genetics, we learn all this stuff, and I have all my notes. So of course I'm going to read from the notes. I put it together and everything, and that's what I'm basically trying to read from. Here's a hypothetical example of Parapatric speciations. Returning to our intrepid fruit flies, when you take genetics, they love to talk about fruit flies. That's the favorite thing. I remember we did the labs of fruit flies. I don't want to get into all of that because you don't want to listen to hear it. But anyways, we pick up the story as the banana bunch is washed up on an island. The fruit flies want a banana or any type of rotting fruit, and they end up on an island. Of course, there's one double disaster. Not only are the island fruit flies now geographically isolated from their mainland relatives, but only a few larvae have survived the harrowing journey to end up colonizing the island. 2 rare genes survive. That's usually what's going to happen. You may have genes that are rare in a large population, but when they get separated, those rare genes may be more pronounced in the new population, smaller population. So they're going to have more chances to show up and everything, which will, of course, as you can imagine, speed up the Parapatric speciation. Rare genes survive. These few survivors, just by chance, carry some genes that are rare in the mainland population. One of these rare genes happens to cause slight variation in mating dance. In the case of the flies, of course, they dance differently, and eventually after millennia pass or centuries, they can no longer, the males do their dance to the females, and the females are no longer interested, at least on the mainland, because it's changed, so they can't reproduce. And eventually, more time goes by, and now they're so differently genetically and reproductively that they just can't reproduce. It's like humans and chimps. Even though there's no evidence one way or the other whether or not humans can mate with chimps, but I don't think you're going to find too many humans willing to do that. 3, gene frequencies drift. These small differences, which are rare on the mainland, drift to fixation in a small population. When they say gene frequencies, like for example, brown eyes, blue eyes, hazel eyes, or whatever. Let's say that there's a gene for, say pink eyes. Of course, no one has pink eyes, or you don't see pink eyes, right? But let's say that population of maybe 100 humans, 1,000 humans go to Mars, and if something happens, we can no longer communicate, but they're able to live on Mars. But half that population has a gene for pink eyes. Now, pink eyes start to show up, and after a while, they start to have all pink eyes. Well, maybe not all of them, but you know what I'm saying. It's going to show up more. More changes. As the island population grows, the unique reproductive features on the island result in a cascade of changes caused by sexual selection. These changes optimize or at least improve the fit of males and females' genitalia to one another and female sensitivity to the nuisance of the mating ritual. Flies also experience natural selection and favors better suited to the climate and food of the island. And of course the females on this new island, they notice, the males aren't dancing exactly the same, but they get used to it, and eventually that's the dance they prefer. Fly speciation. After some generations, the island flies become reproductively isolated from the mainland flies. Parapatric speciation has occurred. In Peripatric speciation, small population size would make full-blown speciation a likely result of the geographical isolation because genetic drift acts more quickly in small populations. And now we have, let's go back to Allopatric Speciation, the Great Divide. Allopatric Speciation, as we just discussed, is just a fancy name for speciation by geographical isolation. In this mode of speciation, something intrinsic to the organism prevents two or more groups from mating with each other regularly, eventually causing that lineage to speciate. Isolation might occur because of great distance or physical barrier, such as a desert or river. Allopatric speciation can occur even if the barrier is a little porous, that is, even if a few individuals can cross the barrier to mate with members of the other group. In order for speciation to even be considered allopatric, gene flow between the soon-to-be species must be greatly reduced, but it doesn't have to be reduced completely to zero. And you'll see that with human ancestry, when humans and chimps divided, there most likely was still some mating between the two. And then, of course, when the Homo branch divided, humans, Neanderthals, and all these others, there's probably still some interbreeding, but not much. Parapatric speciation. There's no specific extrinsic barrier to gene flow. The population is continuous, but nevertheless the population does not mate randomly. Individuals are more likely to mate with their geographical neighbor than with neighbors in a different part of the population's range. In this mode, divergence may happen because of reduced gene flow within the population and varying selection pressures across the population's range. We may be observing the first steps of parapatric speciation in the grass species Anthroxanthum odorantum. Some of these plants live near mines where the soil has become contaminated with heavy metals. The plants around the mines have experienced natural selection for genotypes that are tolerant of heavy metals. Meanwhile, neighboring plants that don't live in polluted soil have not undergone selection for this trait. The two types of plants are close enough that tolerant and non-tolerant individuals could potentially fertilize each other. So they seem to meet the first requirement of parapatric speciation, that of the continuous population. However, the two types of plants have evolved different flowering times. This change could be the first step in cutting off gene flow entirely between the two groups. Hopefully you can listen to it again if you want to see hear what I was saying. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. Now finally we got Sympatric Speciation. Unlike the previous one, Sympatric Speciation does not require large-scale geographical distance to reduce gene flow between parts of a population. How could a randomly mating population reduce gene flow and speciate? Merely exploiting a new niche may automatically reduce gene flow, with individuals exploiting the other niche. This may occasionally happen when, for example, herbivorous insects try a new host plant. For example, 200 years ago, the ancestors of apple maggot flies laid their eggs only on hawthorns. But today, these flies lay eggs on hawthorns, which are native to America, and domestic apples, which are introduced to America by immigrants and bred. Females generally now they lay their eggs on the apples, and now they don't go back to the hawthorns. They just lay their eggs on the apples. Now the flies that lay their eggs on the apples are pretty much different than the ones on the hawthorns. And of course, biologists question whether this type of speciation happens very often. In general, selection for specialization would have to be extremely strong in order to cause the population to diverge. This is because the gene flow operating in a randomly mating population would tend to break down differences between the incipient species. This would probably be something that would happen in the future with humans, maybe. I suppose is how we would evolve in the future when humans start colonizing, if we make it that far, that is, colonizing other planets and other systems, and if we don't know about each other, of course we may diverge into new species. When we meet each other, we just think that the other one is just aliens. They just happen to look somewhat like us, have some features like us. Most likely it would be this. Also, of course, allopatric, because geographical barrier. But again, here we go. Here, these are the two main classes. You know, my degree is in molecular biology, biochemistry, with emphasis in evolutionary biology. So I do recommend, you get books in genetics and evolutionary biology. Also, you may want to read Richard Dawkins' The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins' The Greatest Show on Earth, Richard Dawkins' The Ancestor's Tale, and of course, Jerry A. Cohn, Why Evolution is True. These are great books. I would highly recommend you to read. Also, with creationists, just remember this. They never present their so-called findings or ideas at science conventions, and you will never see them write in a peer-reviewed journal. Ask yourself this question, though. Why do they not do that? They would get a Nobel Prize if they could disprove evolution. If they actually had evidence that evolution was wrong, they would get a Nobel Prize and the money and prestige that comes with it, because I believe you get $1 million check. I'm not sure, but I'm sure it's somewhere around that. Not only that, you open new venues for scientists to explore, because just because you disprove evolution, you do not necessarily prove that God exists. Also, evolution has no say on whether or not God exists. So now you just gave a bunch of scientists whole new things to work at. They all got more jobs, making more money because they got more research money coming in. So why don't they do this? Why don't they present their evidence if they are so sure of themselves? They always say the same thing that's wrong. And of course, with transitional species, there's a thing that said, I've heard some people say, if you want to know something is transitional, just ask a creationist. I did a moron review of evolution creation by Shelton Smith. He mentions that Dwayne Gish. If you go to the Bible Reloaded, where they do the Big Daddy track, it's mentioned that this Dwayne Gish was given a skull cap of a hominid. When he was first given it, he said it was 100% ape. And then he was given it again a few years later, and then he said it was 100% human. Which is why they say, if you want to know if something's a transitional species, give it to a creationist. Because they will disagree among themselves. Because it's transitional. It can't be 100% human or 100% ape. It's in between. I mean, yeah, I know we're apes, but hopefully you understand what I'm talking about. But anyways, that's it for this video. Thanks.